Welcome to a special episode of Shine On Policycast. My name is Dries Acke from Solar Power Europe. I'm here at the European Parliament, ready to talk about solar and the next European elections. Great, so we are here with Jutta Paulus, the member of the European Parliament for the Green Party. Thank you so much, Jutta, for making the time. You're here on the Solar Power Europe Policycast. And maybe just an opening question for you. The elections are fast approaching, but if you look backwards, what has it been like to be a member of the European Parliament in these turbulent times for Europe? Yeah. What are your main reflections, your main takeaways from the last years? Jutta.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for giving me the opportunity also to present my thoughts and also my hopes for the next mandate, and also to reflect a bit on what we have experienced in this very unusual mandate, I might say. Mm-hmm. I mean, half of the mandate we weren't allowed to be here in Brussels because of the pandemic. And what I only recently realized that this mandate was sort of a sweet spot, a Goldilocks moment for environment and renewable energy if you look at the history of the European Union and also at the manifestos of some of the parties who will be running again for the next election. And I think what has become very, very clear to everyone in this house is it is not a good idea to be reliant on dictators when it comes to something so crucial as energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that was one of the moments which was very, very astonishing for me when the rapporteur for the Renewable Energy Directive from EPP, where everyone thought, oh my God, he's being the rapporteur, he will try to dim it down as much as possible. But in the hearing that happened, I think 2 weeks after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Mr. Pieper said, well, we have to push up these targets. And everyone was like, oh, okay, they've learned something.
Absolutely. So we came a long way. The Green Deal agenda was there, and it was then boosted by the Repower EU agenda for all the good reasons that you mentioned. Renewables is energy security. I think that is quite a mainstream understanding right now. Question is whether people will continue to remember that, because, of course, memories tend to be short.
Yes, and we already see the first signs. People saying, yeah, but the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow. And I'm always taking those scenarios out of my pocket saying, hey, look at this. We will first have to deal with having far more electricity than our current appliances can use during, for example, sunny spring days when a lot of solar power is flowing into the grids. So we will have to deal with a situation where we need to find a good use for electricity, which is constrained today by market design, before we have to bother about the Dunkelflaute, another German word, which made it into international vocabulary, meaning, of course, the times when there is no sun and no wind.
It's always this baseload question that keeps coming back. And many policymakers are still in the mindset that a solar and wind-based or renewables-based energy system cannot provide reliable baseload. But that's, of course, an understanding that we really need to get rid of to upgrade our knowledge, because a combination of solar and wind plus grids plus storage is a very reliable and probably also the cheapest energy system that we have.
But what I think the European Union has not learned yet is that energy security is also highly reliant on having the materials and having the skills. Right now, the skills are lacking. We do not have sufficient workers in the solar sector, in the wind sector, that will be able to actually do this work, to actually set up the solar parks, deploy the wind turbines, set up the grids. So there's a lot of work still to do. And I think we will have to find some, let's say, innovative ways of maybe having several levels of skills. Because nearly anyone, I mean, as long as you're able to climb the roof, nearly anyone would be able to, let's say, fix the panels on the roof. Of course, you need a highly skilled worker to actually connect them and do all the electricity stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But just to fasten some screws is not very, let's say, a very high skill, and that would be something that people would be ready to learn very quickly.
Certainly. Yeah, but you are touching upon one of the key topics, the electricians as well, because we already see that in the solar sector. And it's not only the solar sector, we are moving to a much more electrified energy system. So that skill of the electrician that can certify solar connected to an inverter, to a heat pump, to a charging facility, that's going to be such an important skill and job. And it's already indeed showing that we have some limitations there, which is causing delays. So
Yes.
what can we do? Would that be one of the topics that you say, like, maybe this requires a European, like sometimes we talk about it as, do we need an Erasmus for electricians or some kind of something programmatic with a bit of a high profile, also just to revalidate the electrician job. Yeah, this is not this is an important job for the future.
Of course. I think the main challenge is that this is hardly a competence of the European Union. So it's more or less the member states who have to get moving there. And let's put it that way, sometimes the educational system is very conservative. For example, I was alarmed when I spoke to an installer some weeks back in my constituency who had just finished his education. And he said, well, I am now approved as an installation engineer for heating systems. Guess how much time did we spend on heat pumps and how much time did we spend on fossil fuel boilers? It's a 3-year education. It's a 3-year education. Heat pumps was 3 weeks.
That's painful.
Yeah.
And it shows that it's not a European competence, but maybe action can be done. If only it was about convening conversations about it between member states, maybe also European funding in that direction. So maybe we need to think a little bit more creatively about supporting the transition on the ground.
Exactly, because there are so many, I mean, of course, we're talking about the renewable sector now, but there are so many other skills which will be needed in the transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to change subject for the moment, because of course the Green Deal agenda is not yet entirely landing. We still have the nature restoration law. This has of course been passed in the European Parliament. We know you have been extremely instrumental in achieving that goal. We're still expecting the sign of the council. Can you tell us a little bit, like, what was the effort like, and to what extent do renewables also play a role in nature restoration? We have been supporting the nature restoration law from the beginning, pushing back on any claims that there's a conflict between the renewables transition and nature restoration. That is something that we really wanted to put straight. There is no conflict. We were all in favor of that. So tell us a little bit about that nexus between renewables and nature restoration.
I really must say I hadn't ever expected to encounter such a vile and fiery campaign against this legislation. And while in climate issues everyone is more or less educated now, or let's say the skeptics are a very small group, and when it comes to biodiversity loss, the knowledge is not as far spread. No. People are not aware that biodiversity is the foundation for our existence, that without biodiversity, we will not have drinking water, we won't have clean air to breathe, we won't have fertile soils, which is the base also for our economy, of course. And around this campaign against the nature restoration law, I was very glad that the renewables industry came out very early in the process and said, hey, this is not what we're onto. We are supportive of this law and we're ready to play our role and play our part. And there are already many good examples all over Europe where for example, a wind park is built and the project manager says, okay, as a compensation for the impact which this wind park has on nature, because of course it has an impact. Everything we build has an impact. It would be a lie to say, no, nothing is impacting this. everything has an impact. And so we have those very good examples where the project manager says, okay, I'm liaising with the conservation groups, with the NGOs in the area, and I'm asking them, where do you see could I make the most impact pro nature? What could I do to alleviate what I'm doing with this wind park? And so I think it's really important that the renewables industry also to counter those arguments that renewables harm nature, that they say, well, we know we have an impact, but we are being responsible and we are doing our best to help nature in the vicinity of the projects that we are building.
Absolutely. And there's so many good examples of that. And not just examples, but it's also moving towards standard practices much more. Because solar developers know their responsibility. And they know this is part of the public engagement and public acceptance that is absolutely required for the project to come to fruition. And if you think about solar, there's an incredible amount of examples where solar is not just an impact on land, but is also regenerating the soil. It's avoiding evaporation, so it's keeping water bodies safe and avoiding the evaporation that it would otherwise do. And also in combination, for example, with the agricultural sector, the agri-solar.
Agri-photovoltaics is a great idea.
Yeah, so solar can even be a nature-positive solution.
Of course, it has to be done well. It has to be done correctly. And I think what's also important that you have the rules, the legislation in place, which makes sure that they live up to this responsibility. Because as you say, if you have a land where there is, let's say, a highly fertilized with a lot of pesticides agriculture, and then you deploy a solar park where you have a meadow below, maybe some sheep grazing around the panels, that is a nature positive development. I think another crucial issue is not only that, but also how do we empower and engage citizens? Because if a citizen learns there is some solar park being built in my vicinity, maybe around the place where I used to go for a walk with my dog, and now there is a fence because there's a solar park, and the profits are going to someone I don't know, someone far away. There is not even a minuscule tax going to my community. Then this is bad for acceptance.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really vital that each and every member state deploys the rules on energy sharing as soon as possible. I think what Germany has done well is that there is this mandatory fee towards the municipality where the park is located so that people can see, okay, there's a solar park, but also we have something where, for example, more buses can run or the kindergarten can be left open because we have this additional money flowing into our municipality. I think it's very important that people see I myself have something, there's something for me in this, not only for the environment, not only for climate, but for me, for us as a community.
Certainly, and that is an awareness that is quite widespread in the sector, and solar also has that versatility. It can really relate to different constituencies quite well, being through rooftops for citizens or to communities with the energy sharing. The energy sharing is indeed something we're very excited about because it really will allow big communities, big rooftop spaces to produce not only for themselves but also for the people around it. So, do you see that as a potential driver of the public acceptance you're looking for?
Yes, of course. I'm seeing it not only as driver for the acceptance, but really as driver for the deployment. Because it is a very, especially for the single citizen, it is a very good incentive. Better even than someone might say, okay, I will invest in a solar park and I will get some sort of interest revenue once a year, but rather saying, hey, I'm building this and my friends and neighbors will be part of this group. We are doing the energy transition by ourselves and we can throw together our money to build things. And this is something where I think a lot of citizens are just waiting for something like that because they want that their electricity is not going somewhere, but that it is shared among the city, among the community. And also, of course, it's a wonderful opportunity for those who don't own a house.
Yeah, or a rooftop that is equally, let's say, beneficial for rooftop solar. So yes, so we are extremely happy that this landed in the electricity market design, because now we can finally go for it and push this business model through across the sector. So that's certainly a
Actually, it
win for
already
us.
was
Yeah.
in the old electricity market directive.
It was, but
So,
it's much improved actually. The energy
yeah,
sharing
yes, of course.
facilities. Yeah.
And it's better enforceable, actually.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Maybe just to go back to the agriculture and to the farmers, because of course, if you're looking forward to the future of the Green Deal, it's hard to ignore the farmers after the protests that they have done. What's your idea of the next step? Like, what is the? Do we need to create some kind of a new deal for the farmers, and to what extent can solar and renewables play a role there, especially given that the agri-solar is an opportunity to kind of bring these agendas together? How do you see that?
I think we already have quite a good example in the new renewable energies law in Germany, where you get a premium if you do agri-photovoltaics. So you get better revenues if you have dual use of the land. So this is, of course, a good incentive for people to try out this kind of projects. I hear a lot of farmers who are really afraid that they may lose access to their land, because often the farmer is not the landowner. So he's paying a lease for the land. And usually those contracts run for 1 year, 2 year, at the maximum 3 years. So they're very much afraid that some solar park developer comes and pays such a high premium that they will lose their fertile land, because the landowner says, well, I'll take the premium from the photovoltaic developer, because why should I give it to the farmer and earn much less money?
Yeah.
And I think it's a very difficult situation to solve, because it goes into people's property, because the landowner will say, well, it's my land, it's my decision. And maybe we do need some sort of, let's say, forging a contract between the industry, the solar industry, the wind industry, that they say, okay, we are offering that at least part of the project is always done as agri-photovoltaics, so that the farmers are no longer afraid of losing land. We should also put much more emphasis into building space PV, not only roofs, also facades, also ground which is already sealed. Like, I know that there is legislation, I'm not sure in which member state it was. I think it was each parking lot has to be covered with PV.
Yes.
Which is, of course, I mean, this ground is sealed and useless, except for putting cars there, of course. And for cars, it's even good being in the shade. So it's actually a win-win situation. I think it's also important for the public acceptance, saying, hey, we're not going for the cheapest solution, which harms farmers and nature, but we are going for a solution which uses less resources. And that could also help in the acceptance. But it's very tricky to do something in a legislative way. I think this is more something where the sector itself would like give guidelines or encourage people to find this sort of solutions.
Absolutely. Because I hear myself saying more and more as a solar industry representative that solar produces electricity, but you have a byproduct called shade. And that is becoming equally important in certainly given temperature rises and everything, what it can do for parking lots, but also what it can do to avoid evaporation of soils and everything. So there's a lot of potential there, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yes, or also as a shield against hail.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there are some projects running also from vineyards and also the fruit trees, which need to be shielded against hail. And if you can do it with solar panels, why not?
Yep, and that's happening more and more. Yeah. Maybe another question around the future agenda. Another topic that also is quite central, it seems to us, to the debate is the question of industry competitiveness. What's your view on that for the next years? How can the renewables industry, how can solar support that competitiveness exercise?
I think we have two sides of that coin. The one side, of course, is that solar production industry is facing hard times because of the huge subsidies China is giving to their manufacturers. So our manufacturing industry doesn't have the same support from the member states. Also, DG competition is always very, very, let's say, reluctant when it comes to approving state subsidies towards a specific industry. I think it's a strategic sector and we should allow member states to subsidize it. But that's my personal opinion. On the other side, if we would, let's say, impose tariffs on Chinese solar panels, that would be detrimental to our deployment goals. So we have to walk a very fine line of supporting our own manufacturing industry, also to make us more resilient, not only against, let's say, some policy change in China, but also against supply chain disruptions through things like a pandemic or a blocked Suez Channel. Or, I mean, there is a plethora of reasons you could find why a supply chain could be interrupted. So I think it would be a very good idea to put more resilience into our own manufacturing, processing, deployment. On the other side, very cost-efficient production of electricity via renewables and solar will, of course, give our industry a stable supply of cheap electricity, which is not dependent on gas prices, oil prices, uranium prices, whatever. But once you have built the plant, the sun won't write any bill.
Absolutely. And there's these power purchase agreements, which is like the way to do deals B2B between off-takers and energy consumers. So if we can upgrade the system, democratize it as well towards SMEs, then we believe solar and wind and renewables can really lower structurally electricity prices in Europe.
I do think we need both. We need the PPAs, but we also need cheap renewable electricity going to the general public, because it wouldn't be very fair if industry would get the cheap electricity and the consumer would be left with very expensive, dirty fossil electricity and would have to pay the bill. So we have to walk a fine line. We also have to make sure that the grid cost is allocated in a fair way, which is, I know, for Germany a very delicate question, because I would love to see two price zones for Germany, because that reflects the actual situation in the grid. But it's very difficult to convene this to our policymakers at home who are like, but our industry in the south. And I'm like, yeah, that's your own risk if you build in a place where you have a regional government that says we don't want any wind power.
Indeed, yeah, that's a mismatch. And maybe also thinking about your own next steps. Will you be looking for re-election and be part of the next European Parliament as well?
I am running for re-election and I have a pretty good place on the list of the German Greens. So I'm really hoping to be part of this house again. And of course, I would like to work further on my issues, on my topics. I was co-negotiator of the Energy Efficiency Directive. Today we heard from the Commission that they finally came forward with a delegated act, which is based on my amendment, which is on energy efficiency of data centers, which is really, really important. It's a very fast-growing sector. It will take up ever more energy. And even if they are all building on renewable energy, which is great, they should still try to be as energy efficient as possible.
For sure, yeah.
And I do not like the word base load, because we should be talking of residual load, which is the load which is left after renewables covered everything they can. I often say energy efficiency is the base load of the energy transition, because every kilowatt hour we don't need is reducing the load which we have to cover. So I think it is still a far overlooked topic, and we will have to work on it, especially when it comes to the industry in the next mandate. There are still far too many processes which could be let's say, rather cheaply remedied and using much, much less electricity, which would also, of course, enhance our energy security.
Absolutely.
Of course, I still have my other topics. I'm still be working on saving nature. I will still be working on curbing pollution, which is a part of the Green Deal, which has barely been addressed at all. There was so much pushback. And I find it very funny when industry says, well, we have now this transition on our desk. Don't bother us with ever more transition.
Yep.
Well, if we don't do it now, and then we find out 5 or 10 years later that there are several issues which are very, very pressing now, then industry will say, well, why didn't you tell us right away? Yeah. We would have invested in a totally different way. Well, we tried.
Absolutely. And if they want cheaper electricity prices, the energy transition, solar and wind accelerated, will actually is the way to reach that. So they have a lot to gain from the energy transition.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. But they should really do it in a holistic manner. We have the climate crisis, but we have also the biodiversity crisis and we have the pollution crisis. And to perform an energy transition with chemicals that are highly pollutant is simply not a good idea.
Yep. Well, we wish you really the best of luck with the elections and hope to see you back in the coming years in the European Parliament.
Wonderful.
Maybe to a very last question. Is there any more advice you would have for us, for the solar sector? Anything you would like the solar sector to do better, to talk more about, or any other advice you may have, Jutta?
I mean, it's anecdotal evidence, but I often hear from people, solar panels cannot be recycled. The rare materials for the solar panels are extracted from rocks by tiny children's hands, which is, of course, not true. But I think you really have to be very vocal on how you are responsible in your sourcing and Fantastic. How comparatively easy it is to recycle solar panels.
And it certainly is. Yeah. Thanks for that advice. Thank you, Jutta. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of the Shine On Policycast. Make sure to get out and use your vote at the next June elections.